Today, we are lucky to have Kelly Woods with us. Kelly Woods has 7 years of experience working in the open access publishing industry. She began with an internship at the Royal Society, working across some of the oldest academic journals in the world, as well as some of the newest, by assisting with open biology recently after its launch. This internship gave her the passion for open access publishing. She then worked at Frontiers for 4 years, again working across several titles, including Frontiers in Genetics and Frontiers in Psychiatry, two of the largest journals in the portfolio. In 2021, she joined F1000 to lead Open Research Europe, the publishing platform launched in collaboration with the European Commission. She still manages this platform now, but also has oversight of the other publishing platform F1000 works on with funders such as the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Today, Kelly's going to be speaking with us about multilingual publishing. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, so it's been a long time coming, and we're excited to hear more about this today. And really important, as always, with these discussions is to have some of your feedback. So there will be time for questions and discussion at the end. So please do stay for that and yeah, ask some good questions. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Kelly.
Perfect. Thank you. Right, let me share my screen. I'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible. Okay, we should be there. So thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak to the group today. I'm very excited as such an international group to get your opinions on multilingualism in academic publishing. I'll also give a bit of an introduction to what Open Research Europe is in the beginning as well, just in case you're not familiar with that. I'll talk a little bit about the landscape of multilingualism within academic publishing, and then what we're doing on Open Research Europe around multilingualism. So yeah, I'll jump straight in. So firstly, kind of I just wanted to give some information about why the European Commission decided to launch Open Research Europe. So they wanted to lead the way in promoting open science for their beneficiaries, and they had a number of requirements that the platform had to adhere to. They wanted the platform to operate an open peer review system. They wanted it to have immediate publication, open access publication with open data deposited in trusted repositories and linked out to directly from the article itself. They wanted to move away from venue-based impact metrics and focus on article level metrics. And they wanted the platform to have full transparency over policies and fees. So with the model that I'm going to talk you through in a second, they really wanted to explore a more sustainable business model for open access publishing initially for beneficiaries of the European Commission, but talks are ongoing between the European Commission and other funders, predominantly in Europe at the moment, but there is potential to expand that elsewhere. To try to remove the eligibility criteria of the platform. So initially, the platform was launched, and in its current state as well, it's only open to submission from people that have received funding from the European Commission through various different funding streams. But they're now having these discussions with other national funders around Europe to explore, can they remove that eligibility requirement? Can they get enough other funders to put money in to make the pot big enough that it could cover the cost of publishing from anybody, not just researchers that are funded through the European Commission? Just to be clear, the platform is owned by the European Commission and operated by F1000. So I work for F1000, not the European Commission, so I don't have all the answers around what the Commission is planning for the platform. They clue me in on some stuff, but they keep some stuff to themselves as well, because obviously we have a commercial interest. So Open Research Europe was actually identified as an example of successful implementation of Plan S in the 2022 annual report. Also in 2022, the Council of the European Union conclusion stated that we should recognize all forms of research and innovation output and processes, and they stressed that data should be made fair, and Open Research Europe is in full compliance with those suggestions. The next Council of the European Union in May 2023, that actually might be two councils later if I'm getting my maths correct, they encouraged member states to support the pilot program of Open Research Europe to try to create a large-scale open access research publishing service, as well as generally promoting open peer review practices. So that really went a step further and encouraged member states to really promote Open Research Europe among European Commission funded beneficiaries in their countries to really try to make a success of the platform. COARA, the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, supports placing value on the diversity of outputs that researchers produce and other activities and practices that they undertake. So a number of the key principles of the Open Research Europe platform aligns with what COARA is saying as well. So how does the publishing model actually work? So researchers come onto the website and they submit their research via a single page submission system, choosing from one of the various different article types that we offer. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. Our in-house team of professional editors then carry out comprehensive pre-publication checks to ensure that all policies and ethical guidelines are adhered to. Once the article has passed these pre-publication checks, a fully typeset version is published with a DOI, and this enables immediate viewing and citation, as well as immediate indexation in Google Scholar. Once the article is published on Open Research Europe, it cannot be sent to another journal for publication. This is the same as if you had submitted it and published it with another journal. It's just that we publish first and then operate open peer review afterwards. Before we publish the paper online, we also check that the data has been deposited in a trusted repository, as I mentioned earlier, and we are on hand to provide support with that if this is the first time that you are making your data open, because we know that's a kind of a difficult thing sometimes. So once the paper is published online, we will identify and reach out to expert reviewers for their peer review. We invite the authors to engage in that process with us. You can suggest reviewers yourself in the platform. You're also able to see all the reviewers that we have suggested and have invited to your paper. So if you have additional suggestions, you can add them. Or if you have some comments or feedback on the suggestions that we have, you can let us know there. The whole process is completely transparent. Once the peer review is complete, the reviewer comments and the names are published alongside the article, together with the responses from the authors, and any comments from registered users are able to comment directly on the website as well. Authors are encouraged to publish a revised version of their article once they have received the feedback from the peer reviewers. And all of these versions are published on the website. So if there's a second version that has been published with all of the revisions, you can actually click back and see what the first version was. So you can really see how the article has changed during the peer review process and what improvements have been made as a result of the recommendations from the reviewers. All versions of the article are linked and they are independently citable as well. Articles that pass peer review, and I'll talk a little bit about that threshold in a second, are then sent to major indexing databases such as PubMed, Scopus, Dimensions, the European Reference Index for Humanities, and a whole bunch of other indexes that you can find on our website. So what does that actually mean to pass peer review? So on Open Research Europe, there are 3 different statuses that reviewers can publish or choose alongside their review. The first is approved. This basically says the paper is scientifically sound in its current form and only minor, if any, improvements are suggested. We have approved with reservations, which means there are a number of small changes or perhaps 1 or 2 more significant revisions that are required to address these issues. And then finally, we have not approved. And this means that there are more fundamental flaws in the paper that would require serious revisions before it can pass peer review. So in order to reach that pass peer review threshold, you need to have received either 2 approved reviews or 1 approved review and 2 approved with reservations. And that could be across a number of different versions of the paper. So once you have received those 2, either one of those 2 thresholds for peer review, that's when we would class the article as having passed peer review and it would be sent to indexers. So I mentioned at the beginning that authors are encouraged to respond to revise the article once they receive the comments from the reviewers. So they can respond directly to the reviewers through the comment system. So you can go line by line with everything that the reviewer has said. What have you changed as a result of that? Or if you don't want to change something because you think it was actually correct the way that you did it the first time, you can just engage in a conversation with that reviewer and explain why you've made the changes you have or why you haven't made those changes, and explain the reasoning behind the choices in the original article. When we receive a new version of the paper, we contact the original reviewers and ask them to assess the new version, and they then have the opportunity to update their peer review status. So if they originally had a question mark or they were approved with reservations, but they look at the new version and they think you've actually assessed all the changes, they can change that to an approved status, and that could push you over the threshold for having passed peer review. The responses from the author and the peer review reports are all published on the website alongside the articles. So viewers, readers, other peer reviewers can actually come and see what the other reviewers have suggested and how the authors have responded to those comments. And we really feel like by making the peer review process open and accessible, we're ensuring that both readers and authors understand what the necessary criteria was for that paper to have passed peer review, and they can really see how the process has actually happened for this article. Most of the time, peer review happens behind closed doors, and so this is quite revolutionary in opening that whole process up and leaving it there as a learning opportunity potentially for new researchers coming up. So I mentioned that we have a wide variety of article types, and the main reason for this is that we support research across all disciplines. So we publish from the natural sciences to medical and health sciences, all the way to social sciences and the humanities and the arts. And in order to be able to support those disciplines, we have a wide variety of article types as shown on screen. Some of those are only available for particular disciplines, as you can see, such as the essay, which is really only used for social sciences and humanities. Each of these article types have different peer review questions that are asked, because we appreciate this is not a one size fits all approach, and the same questions cannot be asked for the same article types nor the same disciplines. So we really have a personalized process for that. This range of article types also helps us to support research across the lifespan of the project. So you can submit a review at the very beginning of your project when you're still finalizing the concept for your project, and then submit a study protocol or a method paper perhaps when you're in that planning phase, all the way through to the full research article that comes out at the other end. And this is really helpful for researchers to be able to engage with the platform even if they don't feel like they can submit their main research article at the end of the project to Open Research Europe. Because it doesn't have an impact factor, because we don't really use venue-based metrics, we understand that researchers may feel like they need to publish their research article in institution, for example. They need to take into account certain metrics that perhaps Open Research Europe doesn't have yet. But what we do have here is with these alternative article types, you have the opportunity to engage with the platform, try out this new post-publication peer review process with a different article type, and you can still go ahead and publish your final research article with whoever you wish to publish it with. We also have academic community involvement. It's very important. So we have a number of expert advisors. We have, I think it's actually 30 scientific advisory board members now. We meet twice a year with them, and they help us advise us on the policy for the platform and kind of the any changes that we want to make to the model itself, stuff like that. We discuss with the advisory board, and they represent all the different disciplines. We also have community gateway advisors. So the community gateways on the platform are spaces for particular disciplines where you can find all this research that's been published on that particular topic. And each of those is headed up by a working scientist or researcher in the field as well. And then we also have collection advisors. So the collections are similar to the community gateways, but they are often focused on more niche subject areas, or they might be focused around a particularly large grant that was awarded or a conference, for example. And each of those have collection advisors as well, who help us to set the scope for the collection and assess the papers as they're coming in as to whether they are in scope for that collection. We now have more than 2,000 authors from over 350 institutions and more than 45 countries. And the top author countries at the minute are Spain, Italy, and the UK. It's kind of surprising to still see the UK there so strong after we, got kicked, well, not got kicked out, we chose to leave rather stupidly, but anyway, we weren't allowed in Horizon Europe anymore, so it's surprising to see that there, but not so surprising to see Spain and Italy at the top there. I mentioned that once the articles pass peer review, they get indexed in a variety of different bibliographic databases that we work with. All the articles that are published on the site are indexed in Google Scholar immediately upon publication. The other indexes mentioned on this page they happen after the article has passed peer review. Some of these indexes will take every single version of the article, whereas some of them only want the latest version. So if your article passes peer review, they'll take that most recent version, but they won't take the initial version that was published. If you then submit an additional update even after passing peer review, maybe there's a few minor comments that you still want to address, you absolutely can do that. And we'll then replace the version of your article in Scopus, say, with that most up-to-date version. So that's how we work with the various different indexes there. There's a more comprehensive list on the website as well. So to bring us back to the main topic of today, just to give you a brief introduction to what Open Research Europe is and kind of set the scene there, what I really wanted to talk about today was multilingualism in academic publishing, and also share with you some details of how Open Research Europe is starting to kind of meddle in this world. So why is multilingualism in academic publishing important? It's increasingly recognized recently that multilingualism is an important but often neglected dimension of diversity in research, which ensures that research remains locally relevant, but also accessible, not just in that local environment, but to a wider community who speak that language. The joint statement of the European University Association, Universities Finland, and Universities Norway states that multilingualism is particularly relevant for Europe, as its research is characterized by geographic, cultural, and linguistic diversity and the common principle of excellence. In recent years, there have been various policies for responsible research and innovation, and also for open science more generally, that have called for increasing access to research and greater interaction between science and society. There is ever-growing pressure on researchers to make their research more impactful and to show the kind of policy impact or the societal impact of the research that they are producing. And this can really only be fully achieved if the research is communicated in multiple languages, including those written and spoken only in very small regions of the world. According to the recent Europeans and Their Languages report, which was, well, it's not really recent anymore, actually, was published in 2012, almost half Europeans were not able to speak any foreign language well enough to hold a conversation, and only 38% were able to do so in English, which was the most widely spoken foreign language. So if we're really trying to increase the societal impact of the work that we're publishing, but only 38% of the population can actually have a conversation in English, and we're only publishing in English or prioritizing publishing in English, we're really excluding 60% of the population from that conversation. And some of this work could be highly relevant to those individuals on the ground, either living and working in the communities. It's not fair to exclude them from the conversation just because we only publish in English. So there's also been a number of other initiatives that talk about multilingualism. So the Helsinki initiative put out a call to recognize the ongoing practice of multilingual publishing and to recognize that the quality of the research itself does not depend on whether the research is communicated in English. That really has no impact on whether the research that was performed is of a high quality. Multilingualism in scholarly communication is an ongoing practice, and they recommend that it is time to fully recognize and reward this invaluable practice through research assessment. Researchers should be recognized and rewarded according to the quality and impact of their research, and language should really be a non-issue in the world of research assessment. The DORA declaration in 2012 stated that responsible assessment entails valuing a diversity of outputs, activities, and impacts, which could include publishing in other languages, not just English. And the Leiden Manifesto recommends protecting excellence in locally relevant research and warns against only recognizing English language publications as examples of excellent research. The Helsinki initiative also promoted language diversity by encouraging quality research being valued regardless of the language or the publishing channel, and also by ensuring that publications in all languages are considered when using metric-based systems of evaluation, so not excluding non-English journals or publishing venues. Evidence actually suggests that researchers in the humanities and social sciences are already more multilingual than their STEM counterparts, but it's important to note that multilingualism is relevant for all fields of science and not just the humanities and social sciences. And this is especially relevant for locally or regionally relevant research and small communities whose languages are often overlooked because not many people actually speak that language. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union also places an obligation on the Union to respect linguistic diversity and prohibit discrimination on the grounds of language. And the European Commission itself has a strong multilingualism policy, but this policy has not yet addressed the value of multilingualism in science, research, and innovation. Also, one of the main goals of the UNESCO recommendation on open science is to make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone. It recommends that member states consider encouraging multilingualism in the practice of science, in scientific publications, and in all academic communications. So what are we actually doing on Open Research Europe to try to increase our multilingualism? So the first thing that we are doing is introducing the opportunity for authors to submit abstracts for their manuscripts in different languages. So now and this feature is live already on the platform actually. So now when you submit to Open Research Europe, you go through the submission form as normal. When you come to the section that you want to, where you need to input the abstract for your article, the first box will be in English. We will still require that the abstract be submitted in English, but you'll also have the opportunity to use this add translation button at the bottom here. So you can choose from 4 additional languages. That's German, French, Italian, and Spanish, and click add translation, and it will create these, either whatever language you've chosen, translation boxes within the submission form. And there you can insert the text of the German translation or the French translation or whatever of your abstract of your paper. And you can do that for all 4 of those additional languages should you so wish to do so. And then once the article is actually published, this is what it will look like. This is obviously not a real article. This is a test on our test server. We haven't had a real one be published yet, but we're hoping to get one soon. And so if you were to submit the abstract in all 5 of the languages, the first one that would be displayed by default would be English, but you would be able to click between the different tabs here and choose the other languages that you had submitted the abstract in, and that text would then be displayed here. In a PDF format, all of the different translations of the abstract would be listed one after the other in the PDF. So what we've done here is just for now, the abstract in 4 additional languages. This would just be provided by the author. This is not a translation service that we are providing. This is just the authors providing the text themselves in a different language. We're not currently doing any checks on that. So if there are revisions made to the English language version of the abstract, we will make sure that the other translations have been changed as well, but we don't have the capacity within the team to check the translation quality. So we're really relying on the authors to provide the translations of these abstracts. As I said, at the minute, it only applies to the main abstract of the paper, but we do have plans to extend this multilingualism to the metadata, the title, and the keywords, and also other elements of the paper itself. So the idea here is we started with the abstract because the abstract should contain most of the important words that the title and the keywords would also have. So the main goal is to increase the discoverability of content on Open Research Europe by allowing readers and researchers to search in other languages. So if you were to search for, I don't know, something about COVID, probably a bad example, but something about COVID in a different language, you would be able to find that paper on Open Research Europe if the abstract had been provided in that other language. So it really helps the discoverability of content on Open Research Europe, and people are able to read the abstract of this paper in their own language and then decide if they actually want to invest the time and energy to read the full paper in English. So hopefully the abstract is doing that well enough for now. But once we expand the multilingualism to include the metadata, the title, and the keywords, this will only increase the discoverability and the search engine optimization of content on Open Research Europe even more. But as I said, we are looking to expand this even further and include other features of the paper in different languages, or perhaps add additional languages as well. These were the 4 languages that were requested by the European Commission, as they are the most commonly spoken within the European Union at the minute. But we could offer additional languages as well. This does require some careful thinking about how we would display that on the PDF. For example, if an author was to choose to submit, I don't know, 20 different languages of the abstract and the title and the metadata, that's going to be a very messy PDF. But that's kind of something for our UX team to address if and when we get to that problem. And so I'll throw the question over to you guys to see what would you actually like to see within Open Research Europe as a feature of multilingualism on the platform. And I'll hand over to you for any questions about either the platform or about multilingualism in publishing as well. I'll share the slides afterwards because I also have some kind of references and some further reading, some really interesting blogs and initiatives by the various organizations that I mentioned. So I'll share these after the presentation today. But yeah, I'll hand back over to you for questions. I can't see anyone, so until I stop sharing.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. So I was like, I hope you can see me. Thank you so much for that. It was really interesting to learn more about Ori and also those efforts. I had a couple questions, but I wanted to see first if anyone who's attending had any questions or comments, feedback for ORE on these efforts to make their publishing platform more accessible. Yeah, Steph, I'll go after you.
My question is about sort of balancing this idea of providing more options and adapting everything to everyone without basically making it harder for people to find things. So that's my main question, right? Like, and this is attention. I think just generally as journals start taking on more options, more possibilities, like as a researcher, obviously, if I cannot understand the abstract, I'm out, right? So this is very important. But the question is, like, how can we get those options without the clutter?
Yeah. So I think this is why we made it an optional service as well. So you don't have to provide it in another language, but you can if you want to. Kind of misinformation is why we're not providing a translation service at the moment as well. So we don't have the capability within our teams to provide these human provided translations. But obviously there are AI tools out there that are starting to be able to do this. However, we don't really feel like they're accurate enough within science and within academic research, especially not for a platform as broad a scope as Open Research Europe. So we didn't want to put any content out there that was kind of misinforming anybody through a dodgy AI translation tool. So yeah, rest assured, we're not just running these through Google Translate. In terms of like cluttering it up, what you're looking for when you're looking for research, it shouldn't really do that because we're not removing the English language version. We're not replacing it with the translation. So you can just find it through searching in another language. So it shouldn't really make it any messier. There won't be duplicate entries of the paper, for example. So you won't be finding the same paper twice, but just one completely in English. There'll all be one record. So whether you're searching in English or in another language that we have the abstract for, you'll still be directed to the same place. So hopefully we're not cluttering it up too much, but we're really expanding people who can find it where maybe English isn't their first language. And like you said, they have a chance there to actually read the abstract and decide, okay, this is a really important paper for me and my research, or for me in my life. If they're just a citizen and want to engage with the research, then they can make the decision, an informed decision about whether they actually want to invest the time and energy into figuring out the rest of the article. Whereas if we didn't have that abstract in another language, I feel like that's just another barrier for them to engage with the research.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries.
I was going to you kind of answered my question, but I was just curious about how generative AI was changing how you thought about this. And when authors do their translations, then though, is there anything on there that tells them not to, like, because I would imagine that, well, if it were me and there were the options, I would just be like, oh, I feel like I should do this. Maybe I'll just try using Google Translate and then back translate and see what it looks like or whatever, like how many authors do you think have the capacity to provide abstracts translated by people in all of those languages? And what percentage do you think are just using generative AI or Google to do it anyway?
Yeah. So like I said, we haven't actually received any submissions yet. It's a very new feature
Okay.
on the platform,
Okay.
so I can't speak to like what proportion I think are doing this now. But in terms of the future, what proportion do I think will be doing this? That's a really interesting question. So we do have in our policies that you can't use AI to generate text in your article unless you have cited that you have specifically done that and explained exactly how you've done it. So if they were to use a translation tool to provide the abstract, I would expect that they should cite that within the acknowledgements of their paper that that is what they had done. And in that instance, we might have to do a bit more of a check on that abstract to make sure that it's okay, or to just check with the authors, have you actually had this read by somebody who understands the subject and can speak this language fluently, to make sure that the translation of this is good enough. I'm also working kind of on an unrelated note with Dimensions, who are currently adding AI summaries of articles, like kind of plain language summaries, to their papers that are generated by AI. And I'm really interested to see how that's working. So that is part of the pilot that I'm on, is to have a look at articles on Open Research Europe that have had these AI plain language summaries generated in Dimensions, and see how well is that tool doing this. Is it actually able to summarize the content of this paper for a lay audience effectively, or has it completely missed the point of this paper and is just chatting absolute rubbish? I hope that we can get to the point where authors will be able to use tools like this to make this process easier, or perhaps we as publishers can just use tools like this to make it easier without putting any additional burden on the authors, because I do appreciate that we are asking for authors to do so much stuff that isn't really the core research, and we really should be protecting their time for what they do best. And I think there's more of a role here for publishers to play, to step up in the communication, in expanding the communication of the content through multilingualism. So check back in with me in a couple of months and I'll see if we have some like weird and wacky abstracts out there that seem to have been generated by Google Translate, but hopefully we'll keep a close eye on the first few that come in anyway.
Yeah, I have used Elicit and showed my students how to use the Elicit, which I don't know but it's sometimes the stuff that it summarizes as being like the conclusion of the paper or something is just totally
yeah.
Martin, you have your hand up. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Yeah, hello.
Hey.
I was wondering about support for articles that deliberately are not in English in the first place. It feels to me we're actually going backwards on that if I look at it historically, because I know that one major astronomy journal at least 20 years ago still had the option to submit articles in French.
Mm-hmm.
A Polish astronomy journal that was set up in the 1920s originally only accepted articles in Latin, so still in the early 20th century, and then switched to accepting articles in English, German, French, and Russian, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting problem that we face here. I think for us as F1000 is a really small publisher, we really just don't have the capabilities to be able to manage peer review processes in 6 different languages or an infinite number of languages. It becomes very difficult to try to make sure that the peer review reports that are being submitted are valid and constructive. So we do a lot of checks on every single peer review report before we publish it to make sure that it's actually a valid contribution that is meant to improve the quality of the research and not just somebody having a bit of a vent on an angry Wednesday afternoon. We wouldn't be able to offer that service if the reviews were coming in kind of 8 different languages. This is something that we do provide on a gateway that we have on F1000 Research. So F1000 Research is F1000's kind of flagship platform. It was the first one that we launched on this post-publication model of peer review. And on that platform, we have the Japanese institutional gateway where all of the submissions are in Japanese. The peer review happens in Japanese. This takes an extortionate amount of work. It was a really bad language for us to pick as the first one for us to do this multi-language, because it's a completely different alphabet, which is a whole nother thing, right? Something that I didn't necessarily think about, but you need a whole different production suite to deal with a different alphabet, different characters, and all that stuff. So and the website as well needs to be able to support that. So it gets very complicated very, very quickly to be able to do that. The good thing about the content being open access and with Open Research Europe is we will actually already deposit your content for you on Zenodo in English as we receive it. But if you want to deposit that content in additional language because you have prepared the article already in French or Spanish or whatever, you are absolutely free to take that content and deposit it either in your institutional repository or in some other database or in Zenodo as well in an additional language. We just won't do the peer review in that language. We will do the peer review in English, but the final version of the article, if you like, if you want to translate that yourself or amongst your team and deposit that elsewhere, you can. But yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. It's just very difficult to manage it in so many different languages, especially for such a small publisher.
So it's interesting to learn that actually the peer review is a major issue on that. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I remember, I think someone submitted to an astronomy journal 20 years ago something in Latin. And the
that would be hard to find peer reviews.
The editor had a tough job on finding a suitable reviewer for that.
Yeah. So one of the criteria that we look for in our reviewers is geographic diversity. We really want to try to make sure we have geographic diversity across our reviewers, and that becomes increasingly difficult when you're trying to publish in different languages. Spanish, not so much because it is so widely spoken in various parts of the world, but Polish, for example, or a language that is kind of really only spoken in one country. Ideally, we would try to have reviewers based in different countries. Then you have to go through, trying to find, okay, is that a Polish sounding name for a researcher based in the US? Maybe they'll speak Polish. And then you're making a certain number of assumptions about people, and it just doesn't work. And you're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. We should really be making sure that this person has the expert knowledge in the subject area rather than can they actually speak this other language as well. But then on the flip side of that, are you excluding a certain number of researchers because they don't feel like they have the fluency in English to actually translate this? But I think that's less of an issue, to be honest. Most researchers can speak English or can review in English, at least with some support perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm interested to ask a little bit about the review system. And so there are no kind of associate editors or anything. So all of it's kind of on the publishing team. And then the peer review process, in terms of finding reviewers, is it kind of similar to, other publishers, would you say? Or how do you, I know you said you try to have diversity, but how do you identify those reviewers? And then, one of the things I find is interesting is that the papers can get through with as long as they have one accept, they have 2 accepts with revisions, they can still get through. And is there pushback from authors or reviewers who have put a lot of time into, if the paper's published without them, if there's not even a minor revisions, obviously they can make those revisions, but I don't know. I'm just thinking through. I'm an associate editor for a different journal, and just thinking through kind of how reviewers might feel if we were just okay, two of you still had these concerns. I don't know. I guess except with reservations, is that a major revision or a minor revision? Because I feel it was either reject, accept reservations, or accept. And so accept reservations is a really big window.
It's a bit vague. Yeah. Okay, so the first thing you said, there's a lot of work for the internal editors. So when the paper is first submitted, we do some extensive checks on the quality of the paper. So this is things like image manipulation, plagiarism. We make sure that the appropriate ethics approval has been acquired and is cited within the paper, that all the funding is demonstrated, declared, appropriately. We also check that the methods have been described in what we feel is enough detail to be able to be replicated by somebody else reading the paper. So it's not enough to say we performed the experiment as they did, because quite often this other paper that you're citing might not be open access, and now this person can't reproduce your work. So we can carry out a number of checks in that sense before we publish the paper, and this can often actually lead to quite significant revisions by the authors of us asking them to explain something in more detail or provide more information, etc. Once the paper is published, that's when we start reaching out to the reviewers. So we do use very similar processes now to find those reviewers as other journals. We actually just hugely changed our peer review model like 2 months ago. It used to be that peer reviewers were all suggested by the authors. So before you were able to publish the paper, you would have to provide us with 5 suitable potential reviewers. Once we had those from you, we would then publish the paper and we would start issuing those invitations. If those reviewers didn't respond or couldn't do it, we would come back to the authors for more suggestions. This actually wasn't so much of an issue on Open Research Europe, because we tend to find reviewers for papers on ORE quite quickly, because they have a certain kind of quality associated with them because they've received European Commission funding. But on some of our other platforms, F1000 Research in particular, it's not as well known. It doesn't have that kind of pre-stamp of equality because it could be published, could be funded from anywhere. So we struggle a little bit more to find reviewers there. So what we were finding was that the burden on authors to identify these reviewers and send suggestions and make sure that they meet all of our criteria was too high. So we removed that mandatory element from our submission system, and now it is completely optional. So as soon as your paper has passed all of its pre-checks, we will publish it and we will start identifying reviewers and inviting them. If you want to, as an author, you can provide suggestions of people you think would be well suited. You can also provide suggestions of people who you think would not be well suited, so people you want to exclude from your review, as long as you tell us why. And then you can log into the platform at any time and see who are the people that we have suggested and what is the status of the invitation there. So yeah, we don't make any decisions, but about the science, we leave that up to the peer reviewers. Once they submit their peer review reports, we carry out a number of checks on those peer review reports to make sure that they are thorough, that the people have actually read the paper, that they haven't just said like, this is fine or this is bad. Like, we really make sure that you have provided constructive criticism that is supposed to help the authors improve the article. However, we do kind of agree that approved with reservations, it varies. It can vary greatly between like a couple of minor issues here and some, 1 or 2 major things, which that particular reviewer might think, actually, I don't think this paper should pass peer review unless those things have been corrected. So we are working internally to address this and come up with some more clear guidance for reviewers and also for authors on what these different stages of the statuses of the peer review reports mean, what can be an approved, what can be an approved with reservations. We're also looking at potentially using the expertise of our in-house editorial team, who spend day in, day out looking at these peer review reports. Maybe they can send some advice to authors to say, you've said this is approved with reservations, but we actually think it should be not approved based on what you've said or whatever. We do this already on a very ad hoc basis, but we're working to try to include this as part of our kind of standard workflow, really. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like we went off on a bit of a tangent, but
no, I just am thinking about like how, I don't know how.
Oh, the revisions as well, you said, like, yeah. So we encourage authors to respond to all of the reviewers' queries, whether they make the change or not. We expect them to explain why they haven't made said change in their response to the reviewers. Even if the reviewer gave them a tick and they still had some suggestions, we would still recommend that the authors revise their manuscripts. And even if the paper has passed peer review at this point, you can still go on submitting versions and finishing off those last aspects of the paper. It just means that whilst you're finalizing these more minor details, the paper already is benefiting from that indexation in Scopus and PubMed, etc., and it's increased its discoverability. What we find is actually that researchers do tend to continue to submit those revisions because they really don't like having a question mark on their paper. Because if you go to the Open Researcher website and you don't know anything about our peer review model and you just see this paper with some question marks or even the red cross on it, authors get concerned that people will have a very negative reaction to the view that has, and that the paper is not finished because there's still some questions about it. So even though it's not required for you to pass peer review to remove all of those and get to the 3 green ticks or 2 green ticks, whatever, we find that often authors, they want the green ticks. It's like a game. Like, you want to get the big green tick and the pat on the back, right? You don't want to leave it open with a question mark or a cross. So yeah.
Steph's going to ask a question, but I need to one follow-up quick. So, and then is not accept, is that like reject or reject with resubmission? Is that like, once you say not accept, are you like, no, you have to really rethink this and go somewhere else? Or is it just like that they're going to revise it before it's technically accepted and indexed? Like, what is?
Yeah. So a not accept, it's not a reject because the paper's already published in our model, right? So it exists on our platform kind of like a preprint or a verified preprint because we've done more extensive checks on it than what would happen at a preprint server. But not accept does mean like, yeah, there's significant work that needs to be done here before this paper is ever going to pass peer review. So at that point, we would hand it back to the authors and we check in with them regularly to ask, are you making the revisions that the reviewer has requested? Sometimes this could take a long time. They might need to rerun an experiment or change the method or increase the data sample size or whatever. So we do check in with them regularly to see what's happening here. Is this a lost cause? You can't make the changes that the reviewer is suggesting, because sometimes that's the case, or you're working on it, but it's going to take ages. And this is something that we are also trying to address internally. We don't think it's clear enough on the website what is happening with these papers. So if it hasn't passed peer review yet, are they working on it? Is it dead? Like, what's happening with it? We don't know at the minute from looking at it. So often we know behind the scenes what the situation is. It's just not clear publicly. So we're working with some UX to try to see how can we display this on the website to say like undergoing revisions or authors doing more experiments or just something that tells you, yes, this paper is still being worked on and we are expecting to receive a new version at some point, versus no, this paper is not being worked on. And what I would like to include is, why is that? What is it that has stopped you from revising this paper further? People have left the team, or you don't have funding anymore, or it was a limited sample size and you can't increase it now because it was a clinical trial. I don't know, but just something to provide the reader with a bit more context, because I think there's still something valuable to learn as a community from having these papers out there. If you're looking to run a similar experiment in the future, it could be really helpful to you to see that review report that says it's really important that you have at least X people in your sample, otherwise we really can't trust this, or whatever the situation is. But yeah, I think it would be sad to remove these papers from existence completely, because I think that would only create the opportunity for someone to make the same mistake again. What I hope is that by having these here, we can help everybody with planning their future experiments not to repeat the same mistake, or to just improve it going forward so we don't have that happen again.
I'm not going to keep pushing. I feel like I could keep asking questions around this, but I'm going to let Steph talk a little now.
So my question is about the decision to not have an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It seems because it seems almost less genuine, because a lot of the decisions that are being made by ORE are editorial decisions, but they don't have a head, right? They don't have stated expertise. They're done. And so I would be very interested to know. So first of all, there is the option for basically a desk rejection if it doesn't pass that first, right? So basically, if it's a preprint, it just means that it hasn't been desk rejected by ORE.
If it's published but it hasn't been peer reviewed yet.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, that
But
is true.
but who is doing the desk rejection is something that I'm sure that scientists would find useful information, and why, right? So
Yeah.
the why may be clear, but I think the who is also important, right? Like, because eventually things go out to peer review, and there are decisions being made there, right? Like, have they sufficiently addressed this? And so my question is, why was there a decision in the making of ORE to not have person editors?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. So the first thing is the checks that we do internally, by definition, are very objective. It is yes or no. Have you got your ethics approval? What is the number? We use a lot of tools to help us assess things like plagiarism and image manipulation and stuff that I really don't feel like we should be asking academic editors to check this stuff anyway, because I feel like a lot of this, you don't need the subject matter expertise. You need, how do I actually detect image manipulation, what to look out for, how do I look out for paper mills or fake authors, that kind of stuff. Again, this is not really issues we have on Open Research Europe, but stuff that we face more on our flagship platform, F1000 Research. So that's the first thing. So I don't feel like the editors in-house are making any decisions that they are not qualified to make, because they're not making any decisions really on the quality of the science. In a sense, they are really assessing the underlying research methods and the ethics and all of that kind of stuff. Is that all in place? Is that all described in enough detail? Where the editors might make a decision is off the back of the peer review reports that come in. So in a conventional model, they receive the peer review reports and then they say, yes, author, you can revise this, or no, this is beyond help, reject it, or based on the peer review reports, I think this article is good to go and we can publish it. So we just feel at F1000 and the European Commission and other funders like the Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates, that this is a little bit of an unnecessary gatekeeper in the research process. Natasha, I feel like you're going to come at me in a minute because you are an editor, right? So it's just a different way of doing it. So we try to create a more collaborative environment between the peer reviewers and the authors directly, so that they can have a conversation between them without a middleman of the editor there. So everything is completely open as well, so the authors can see all the details of the peer review reports and who they are as well. We don't advise that they communicate outside of the system because that could lead to weird stuff happening, but they should talk through the system between the resubmissions and stuff. And others are kind of adopting a similar model, right? eLife is also moving towards a more similar model. So they have academic editors which assess based on impact at the very beginning stage. Once they have assessed the impact of the paper, then it goes out for peer review, but they don't look at it anymore after that. Once it's gone out for peer review, the authors have decided they've done the revisions, this is the paper in its final form, that's it gets published. So that's also a really interesting model, but it's not a model that's relevant for Open Research Europe because we're not assessing based on impact. We're really assessing on the fundamental quality of the science and the underlying principles of the science. If it's sound, we will publish it. So we don't need that impact check that editors often provide. If it's not sound, then it doesn't get approved during peer review. And you're saying if it's not sound, then it's not detected by our checks.
Well, so it's still published on ORE as unsound research?
I mean, we hope that we would capture most of the unsound research through the preliminary checks that we do. If there are other checks, like if there's other elements of it that we are not qualified to assess, that the peer reviewers have identified that this paper is unsound, then at that point, that was when we would start considering a retraction, similar to what you would in a conventional journal.
So it is possible. Well, the thing is that a retraction in conventional journals happens after acceptance, whereas in this case, it can happen basically because of a rejection.
I mean, it's still happening after acceptance. It's just that we accept before peer review because we have like the standard terminology like doesn't really work for us. It doesn't align properly. But it would still be happening after peer review, really, unless the authors were to get in touch with us and say, oh, we made a mistake and we feel like we should retract this. So if we were to receive really for like really huge concerns over a paper, then we could instigate a retraction process at any stage after publication. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I guess my confusion comes from sort of like the fact that things are getting published before they are scientifically sound, and then they get evaluated, right? And so, right, so that's my so the retraction happens, and the peer review happens after publication, and the evaluation of soundness comes after publication. And so what my concern is I'm a microbiologist, and COVID happened, right?
Yeah.
And I read so much absolute trash on bioRxiv that had the right sample numbers, and all of and it wasn't plagiarized, but it was really damaging,
Yeah.
right? Really damaging. And the saving grace then was, it hasn't been peer reviewed. These are
Yeah.
not scientific publications. So the reason I'm asking about this editor and sort of having a clearer view of what has in fact been approved and what hasn't been approved is because this seems to kind of blur the lines of what is real science and what isn't. And so from the reader's perspective, from a researcher perspective, where I'm trying to figure out if this is a good example or not,
Yeah.
So I just wouldn't want there to be bad publications.
Yeah. So what I would say is the checks that we do are vastly different than the checks that you would get on bioRxiv. They are extremely more stringent and they take a lot longer for us to do. bioRxiv, you can deposit your paper within 48 hours. This is not the case with Open Research Europe. Our standard times are about 30 days from when you submit the paper to when it actually gets published. It doesn't take us that long to do the checks. It takes us normally 7 days to do the checks, 7 to 10 days, and get back to you, but then takes an additional 20 days for the authors to make the revisions that we have we've asked for during that period. So we're hopeful that we're not hopeful. We believe that we are like weeding out a lot of the really unsound, dangerous science that's not science before it actually gets published on the platform kind of as a preprint. However, even after it is published on the platform, we really try, and we're working to improve the display of this on the website as well, to differentiate what has been peer reviewed and what has not yet been peer reviewed. So this is a preprint kind of, and this is a paper that has undergone peer review and has passed peer review by our thresholds. So there are different labels on the website that dictate that at the moment, and you can filter specifically to see just the stuff that has passed peer review. So the more kind of what we're used to seeing in a journal. But I don't think that is clear enough on the platform at the moment. And this is some work that we are doing as well to try to make this much clearer. This is finished. This hasn't started yet. This is undergoing peer review. So we're trying to make that a lot clearer. What I would say is that we really don't see any more retractions in F1000 research than what you would see in a normal journal of that size. So there's really no foundation for us to believe that we are publishing crappy stuff on the platform any more than your normal journal that does have an editor also publishes some crappy stuff, because it happens, stuff slips through, right? No one's perfect. But we don't have any basis to believe that we are not weeding that stuff out to the same degree as other sort of conventional journals are.
So what is the rate? I mean, I know that right now ORE is not open to, just general scientists, and there is some sort of like excellence requirement for the publishers to be able to publish. But my question is, how often do papers not pass that first check?
So it's about 70% of content on Open Research Europe does pass. So we do reject about 30% of content as a standard on ORE because it hasn't met our criteria. Either, they don't have, but a lot of time, really weirdly, they don't have the correct ethics approval, which I find really shocking. Like, we ask them, have you got ethics approval? And they say, no, I don't need it. And I'm like, well, actually, according to your grant, you do need it, and you need to get it from your institution. Do you have it? And they're like, no. We're like, well, go get it. Like, you should have it already. Go and get it. And we don't allow them to publish unless they have it. Unfortunately, because other journals don't check things like that, that paper may go on to be published somewhere else that hasn't
Yeah.
checked whether they have the ethics approval, but we can't do anything about that. Not ORE anyway. But yeah, so that's one. Another one is data. If they're not able to share their open data, that's becoming less of an issue because it's mandatory under Horizon Europe. Again, for ORE, for F1000 research, that is a much bigger issue because a lot of those researchers have never done this before, never thought about it. It's not mandated for them. The rejection rate and acceptance rate on F1000 research is significantly higher. We accept about 40% of content on F1000 research in comparison to 70% of content, between 70 and 80% of content on Open Research Europe. So you really can see the significant difference there in the quality of the content on Open Research Europe and our other funder platforms in comparison to the stuff on F1000 research as well.
That's really interesting. I think one thing that, like, these types of statistics are so important to understand as things get reshaped. Because they do signal a change in priorities, right? So
yeah,
the easiest one for me is data availability, because ethics have kind of been a thing, but
yeah.
Data availability didn't used to be a limiting factor. And so I think that these things do signal a change in our value system about what is good science, but understanding that there is a filtering of these things is so important, right? So yeah, so I've seen really excellent papers on F1000. I've also seen papers where they are presenting software and the code for the software is not available. It was one paper, it was like kind of stuck in the middle of peer review and this eternal limbo. And I would have liked to not see that paper ever, right? Because what happens then is someone will say, cite this seeds a lot of methods problems that you were mentioning earlier, where people are now able to cite something that hasn't been proper. It's like citing a bioarchive, right? But
a preprint,
yeah. And so, but it's important to be able to have some sort of understanding of, okay, no, we're not actually letting things without data through.
Yeah.
We're not letting these other things through, because I think as a scientist, I don't have time to read all
to filter it, right? Yeah.
And so to be able to know how the filtering was done before I even got to the website is really, really important, especially if there's not going to be a face that I can say, okay, this person is an expert in this and they are the editor for this journal. I trust them. If it's a set of criteria, it's a bit more complicated, but it's so important to create the sense of trust in the parameters that you are setting.
Yeah. So we do use the scientific advisory board for some of this stuff as well. So if we have a paper that we are just a bit concerned about, it doesn't necessarily fail any of our criteria, but we just don't feel good about it, because you can spot these things, especially when you're looking at these papers day in, day out. We will go to a member of the advisory board who has expertise in that particular subject and say, can you just have a look at this and just let me know, is this legit, or this looks a bit shady to us, what do you think, and get their input before we make a decision. And then we can provide more helpful feedback to the authors as well, so that perhaps they can make those revisions prior to publication and we can actually get it up to the point where we feel like we can publish it, or perhaps there are really just issues with it that we don't want to publish. I know we're out of time, so I'll be really quick, but I did just want to mention because one of the issues that you're sort of highlighting here is that we have a mixture of content on the site, right? Some stuff that is peer reviewed, some stuff undergoing, some stuff that hasn't even started. And I think that I agree that can be confusing to a reader who doesn't understand anything about the model. You just think it's a journal, like a normal journal. You're going to expect that everything here is peer reviewed and that you can therefore trust it to a certain degree. One thing that we have just built and released 2 days ago, in collaboration with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is a brand new preprint server called Verixiv. So that's Verixiv. I'll see if I can share a link with people afterwards, so you can have a look. So basically, this will at the moment operate in collaboration with our Gates Open Research Platform, which is the equivalent platform that we have like Open Research Europe, but for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation beneficiaries. Now, what will happen is when you submit to Gates Open Research, it will first be published on VeriCive. It will go through all of the same checks that the papers on ORE do, and it will be published as a kind of what we're calling a verified preprint. So you can trust it a bit more than what's on other preprint servers because we do a lot more checks on them than other preprint servers, but it still hasn't undergone peer review. It will then undergo peer review on VeriCive, so on the preprint server, and this will all be published exactly the same way you see it on Open Research Europe at the minute. Once the paper then reaches that threshold for having passed peer review, we would then send what we would call that version of record paper over to Gates Open Research. So the Gates Open Research becomes a version of record venue that only contains the stuff that has passed peer review, but the whole process is still completely open and completely transparent, just not on this platform. It's just happening over there. So we're moving kind of, we still are operating on the same publish, review, curate model, but we're just providing a degree of separation there between the content that has passed peer review and the content that is still in some stage of undergoing peer review. So at the minute, that's just something that we've launched for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation beneficiaries, but sorry, Natasha, but we are hoping to expand that out to include other partners and other researchers for that as well. So hopefully that will help to just make the boundaries a little bit more clear there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. I think there are so many new types of initiatives, and I think about it a lot with eLife's criteria, but also plus one has really interesting criteria, which is like, is this saying science? And we don't care the impact, it's about the scientific, and whatever happens within these journals, what are the rules by which the publication ended up there.
Yeah.
And this kind of inspires confidence in the reader, right? There's a reason why something is hosted in a journal and not on a preprint platform. And knowing those reasons, and also I think seeing that separation is so important in allowing me to not have to read through the peer review to decide if I want to cite something. So this is really cool. Sorry, I went over time with the questions.
No, I'm happy to answer questions.
About it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
I will send you now the email.
Perfect.
Yeah, and have a nice rest of your week and have a nice weekend.
You too. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.